The squat is a staple metric of strength performance. It's trained by just about every athlete, and it says a lot about the grit, power, and overall effectiveness of the person under the bar. In every contest, gym, and football combine, everyone lines up to see what happens when some big moosey walks up, loads 8 plates on each side of the bar, and takes it for a ride. Whether they dunk it like a donut and become a hometown legend, or crumble like a wicker chair at a Golden Corral, you know it's guaranteed to be a good show. See, I remember the good old days back when nobody used to squat. I mean, it was a great time to be alive. We got to feel really special for being the few that used the squat rack the way it was intended. We didn't have to even be good at squatting. Just showing up and hitting depth meant that we were a more serious and educated brand of lifter. That era, when skipping leg day was the norm, also meant that all of the squat racks were empty. Like always empty. We could go in any time of day and get our squats in without a weight. Occasionally there'd be some misguided soul doing behind the back wrist curls in the rack, but you could usually get him the fuck out of there by suggesting that there was somewhere else he could take his 30-pound barbell to get those sick forearm gains. Politely, of course.
You get the fuck out of here right now.
Now it's 20 years later and powerlifting and strength sports have exploded. Grow the sport, they said. Make lifting popular, they said. Well, it is. They won, the movement succeeded. Despite my sarcastic tone, that's actually great news because a population that squats, even shittily, is stronger and more useful than a population that doesn't.
Their bones are denser, their muscles are bigger, their heart's in better shape, they're more resilient, they're harder to injure, they're harder to kill.
And that's because the effectiveness and ease of access of squatting is really unparalleled. There's no other exercise that grows an average human being as quickly and can be taught to almost everyone inside of a single workout session. The squat is both a grower and a shower, and that's made it an iconic lift. It's a huge positive that so many people do it. However, just like every dark cloud has a silver lining, every victory is not without its trade-offs. The trade-off of more people squatting is that I have less space to do my squats. Now the racks are always full, and before I start my working sets, I have to wait until the 19-year-old goober who discovered powerlifting last week is done trying to fix his imaginary hip shift. So I figure if you're all going to be inconveniencing me, then I might as well make a video on how to do it less wrong. And boy, is wrong how people do it. See, fuckery in the squat absolutely abounds today, because the rise in popularity has created an entire squat-centric subculture of corny shirts, viral videos, and dumbass memery. And don't forget about the fucking programs. The expansion of squat culture has also created a ton of ideologies around it, each with their own unique methods and gurus and hardline advice on how to get to the next level. You have Squat University, you have Westside, you have Mark Ripito, and they're all at odds with each other. Now this is unfortunate because the beauty of the squat is its accessibility, and in the age of information, simple shit becomes really complicated when everyone is incentivized to hop on social media and give their one weird trick for solving everyone's problems. Eventually you're left with a bunch of weird tricks that just clog up your social media feed and don't give you a clear idea of how all this shit fits together. So allow me to do a community service and untangle the clump of shower pubes that is lifting culture so that we may shed some light on what the squat actually is, why you might do it, and how you might not suck at it. So let's get into it. This is how to squat for absolutely no gains. All across lifting culture, in every corporate gym and at every powerlifting meet, there are closeted lifters who go along with the crowd, doing their leg day with a big smile on their face so no one ever figures out their horrible, shameful secret, that they fucking hate squatting. These are the ones who plan squats after dead so they can skip it when they get called into work or forget to pick up their kids.
Alien ship came down and they were like, hey, and I'm not gay.
Hate crime. We have an alien hate crime.
When they do commit to getting under the bar, they do it in the corner, away from everyone else, so no one can judge their bullshit weight selection and half-assed efforts. Self-fulfilling prophecies are a big force in the weight room. The thing you love to do, that you know you can get good at, that you think about all day, is often within arm's reach simply because you kept it in your line of sight. This tends to be things that are more comfortable early on, movements that suit your build, your temperament, and which become the first thing you can see yourself really being good at. On the other hand, the shit that you are embarrassed to practice in front of other people because of how much you fucking suck at it, you are much more likely to ignore, neglect, and continue to suck at. With benching and deadlifting, it's usually just a matter of not lifting as much weight as your buddies. The ego takes a hit, but oh well. But when squatting is hard, it fucking hurts. The muscles burn and struggle to keep you up. It becomes difficult to breathe, and it is very obvious that a failed rep might actually fuck you up, and not in the good way. When you suck at squatting, you would often choose to eat a cinder block if it meant avoiding doing the next set. I remember the feeling very well. I remember being young and soft where I would bail on a set, not because I couldn't stand up with it, but because I didn't like the sensation of being crushed. Now I love it. But seriously, I remember those psychological defeats, and when you aren't tempered to the strain, the burn, the claustrophobia of feeling like a Pomeranian pinned under its obese owner, the trip to the gym on squat day is a miserable experience. But I can tell you it does get better. Now I can't even imagine what it would be like to give up on a squat for any other reason than my legs just couldn't stand up with the weight. And the cool thing is, when you get to that point, it says a lot of things about your ability to handle other hard shit in life in and outside of the gym. It's not so much that your last 10 rep max really sets you up for that hard talk you have to have with your spouse, but the fact that you are the type of person who forces yourself to do something hard over and over until you figure it out bodes well for the people in your life who rely on you. Cliche and useless as it sounds, there's no better way to temper yourself to squats than time under the bar. You could spend time obsessing over imagined deficiencies, convincing yourself that you will get back under the bar just as soon as I fix that one thing that's holding me back. But everyone knows you're full of shit. Seriously, stop saying that to other people. No one believes you, and it's impacting your reputation.
He can't come out until he resembles the man that I married.
The important thing here isn't that you suddenly hack your squat into some insane jump in strength because you really did find that one weird trick. The important thing is that you just start squatting with some regularity. You need to start a habit of doing good, crisp, sustainable squatting and remove all the stress to put on a show or to grind yourself into the ground. When you find squatting cumbersome, awkward, and you hate it, the metric for success in each session is not you hitting a PR or crawling out to puke into the bushes. It's you just showing up and doing what you wrote down in your workout log. You want to start so light and so easy that you really don't have a choice but to finish the work you wrote out. Take it as vital skill work and see every touch as taking you one step closer to not hating this fucking movement. Eventually, you will be floored at your improved ability to get really fucking hard work in the squats, and your skinny ass legs will thank you. Now, some of the hatred for squatting isn't really related to the uncomfortable strain of moving heavy weight, but to the god-awful fatigue that builds up with higher reps and with more working sets. There are few things that will test how badly an individual wants something than by making high-rep squats the obstacle in the way. Fame, success, security, many will sacrifice every comfort they have to get these things. But if being competitive in the next bodybuilding show requires doubling up on squat days, well, I guess it's time to make that move over to men's physique. And you guys are in luck because it's story time. When I had my gym in Redlands, California, we had one train wreck of a lifter who embodied every stereotype of an underachieving, lazy talent that you could think of. His average training session started with a 90-minute warm-up where he would put on his powerlifting singlet and walk around bugging the other gym members.
Oil?
He was known for talking incessantly at people, not to them, whether they were listening or not, and most of it was about the delusional goals he had in life that required an awareness and work ethic that he just did not have.
I'm going to be a god mummy.
He would then do singles in the squat, doubles if he was feeling extra motivated, up to the lowest weight that his ego would settle for that day. Then he would pace around the gym, bug-eyed and covered in trend sweat, talking about the technical errors that prevented him from squatting 50 pounds more.
It was right there and got away.
Now, he did have a talent for lifting, and he was able to get over a 700-pound squat and an 800-pound deadlift, even with his bullshit efforts. When I pointed out the fact that he hadn't increased his lifts in the several years that I knew him, he agreed to let me handle his programming. This was going to be fun.
You're gonna eat lightning, and you're gonna crap thunder.
Step 1 in the program of unfucking his squat was to do something, anything, besides a top single as part of your training. We never got to step 2. I thought 315 for a set of 10 would be a good starting point, given that he could bench 315 for 10, and his bench max was 300 pounds less than his squat. We also had a 181 female who, weighing almost 100 pounds less and with a meet PR of 419, completed that very same feat not more than a few months before. Watching him go through his warm-ups in preparation for a simple working set at medium effort in an empty gym with no one to hype him up or make him the center of attention was one of the most comedic and tragic moments in my years lifting. He walked around like an ADHD kid trying to find anything to do except his homework. He was visibly anxious and panicky, pacing around the gym while staring at the bar. I continued to poke at him, saying, "Hey man, that weight's not gonna fucking squat itself," until he finally had enough and stormed to the front exit of the gym.
This wedding is horseshit!
Informing me along the way that he needed a Gatorade and had to go to CVS first. Out he went into the world still wearing his brown-tinged singlet. He finally came back, Sour Patches and Gatorades in hand, still anxious and still not doing any squats. It had been an hour since he started warming up and no work had been done. Finally, I broke down. "Fuck man, do 225. Do 135. I don't care, but you're not leaving until you give me a set of 10. It's been 3 years since that day. I sold the gym, moved my wife to Texas, and rumor has it that is still sitting in that gym today, staring at the bar and rocking back and forth like an SVU victim in the shower. See, he was the type of guy who was always talking about what he was going to do instead of actually doing what he was supposed to. He was the type of person who would tell everybody about his grand goals, but who would collapse if the minimum work required to improve included anything he wasn't already conditioned to. He was committed to earning millions so he could live in a mansion and date celebs like Dua Lipa. But if the cost for that life was a set of 10 on squats, he would settle for a single wide with double Lipa. The key to conditioning yourself to this type of work is to give yourself a reasonable entry point and make small steps forward as you acclimate. You could start by finishing your workout with an AMRAP after one of your heaviest sets, and only push it as far as you comfortably can without killing the rest of the workout. This workout isn't about storming straight into the ocean of despair. Just get on the fucking beach first. Don't give yourself a complex for quitting early. Just look forward to next week when you attempt the same weight again and expect an easier time with it. Each time, if you feel up to it, do one more rep than before, or at the very least, try to do the same number of reps at a slightly faster pace. Your goal is not necessarily to hit PRs for the sake of it, although that will inevitably happen, but to just get okay getting farther and farther into the weeds with this movement that you previously fucking hated. Getting better at squats doesn't necessarily have to include a bunch of vomit-inducing AMRAPs. You can simply cut the rest periods on your warm-ups and your regular sets and just start the next working set with your heart rate still slightly elevated. Don't do your normal routine after a set where you rack the bar, sit down, get on IG, and finish off a pack of donuts in between each set. And on that note, on behalf of everybody who has had difficulty doing the bare minimum because they fucking hate squatting, one of my earliest influences, Jesse Morunde, popularized 20 rep squats in the strongman community. He did pass away in 2007, and people still bang out 20 reppers every year in memoriam of the strongman pioneer. See, 20 reppers were great because they conditioned so many physical qualities, but also because they were really, really hard. You couldn't just walk in cold and jump under the bar and knock out a true blue set of 20 rep squats. It required preparation, both physically and mentally. As Jesse would say, if you've got a problem, the solution is to squat more. And guys, I'm super proud to have Boostcamp as a primary sponsor of this channel. Not only is Boostcamp the easiest and most intuitive way to track your training and your progress, not only is it absolutely free to use, not only does it feature an immense library of some of your favorite programs, but it features an exclusive library of programs you will not find anywhere else. In fact, there's so much content there, I'm actually doing a series specifically dedicated to the programs that you will only find on Boostcamp. Stop what you're doing right now, click the link below, download Boostcamp. And guys, as I film this channel just hit 100,000 subs like 5 minutes ago, and that number would not have been possible without the support of sponsors like Boostcamp. You can't have clear goals until you thoroughly understand what they might be and how to reach them. So what goals could you possibly have for squatting? Well, broadly, there are 3. Squatting for general strength, because increasing your barbell squat can also increase your ability to jump, run, throw, and punch. Squatting just to squat more, because you're a powerlifter. And squatting for size, because you think barbell squats are the best way to get those pregnant women thighs you've been dreaming about having. Just like vaccines eradicated the polio virus, internet shaming through the don't skip leg day memes have just about made the chicken-legged bench-only gym bro a thing of the past. Barbell squatting is universally considered the shortest path you can take to having bigger legs, whether you want to balance out that overbuilt upper body or if you actually like the idea of having thighs that can start a fire in the middle of a hurricane. It's also pretty good for giving depth to otherwise flat asses, which is highly valuable in an age where ass selfie photographer is now an actual profession. So that's why this shift in the way that the general population sees leg day has created a line to wait for the squat rack where, in decades past, there really wasn't one. Squatting is so good for hypertrophy because it checks a lot of boxes needed for development. It's a compound movement that works across multiple joints. It uses very big muscles. It takes them through a long range of motion. The ratio of range to load to fatigue is much higher than just about any other exercise there is, and that equals a really devastatingly effective training stimulus. Most lifters will get substantial thigh growth, especially in the beginning, from squatting and squatting alone, with only a few exceptions of leggy lifters or those really focused on just hypertrophy who really need to branch out into other exercises. Just about any physical feat that a human can perform is going to be limited in some way by the strength and power of the legs. If an untrained person practices sitting down and standing up under a load, and that load is increased over time, they will be better suited for literally any physical activity that you can think of. Again, running, jumping, fighting, getting off the couch after a Thanksgiving dinner, all involve a concerted effort between the ankle, knee, and hip. So it's no wonder that the barbell back squat is a primary feature in just about any athletic training program, and it's also used heavily in any mode of training that claims to be functional. Now, having more muscle mass will help with these goals, but we're really looking for neurological changes here, as in how many motor units you can recruit and how fast. For power sports, improving your ability to accelerate really heavy weights away from the floor is a pretty good metric for gauging improvement in your chosen sport. Meaning if you can squat more, you're probably going to be able to change direction a bit faster or hit the opponent a little bit harder. And it is those improvements that are really important, more so than just being able to say you squatted 5 more pounds because you cranked your belt down another notch and spread your taint like Ed Cohen told you to do.
So usually I try to open up the groin back there, and it enables you to sit back more.
Athletes can also tweak their squatting setup to be a little bit more specific to their actual goals. This is like the difference between a sprinter who might do partial squats to increase their power off the blocks versus an Olympic lifter who squats ass to grass to better receive a snatch in the bottom position. Keep in mind though that that's a concern of the most specialized athletes. Most lifters interested in general strength shouldn't really overthink the perfect athletic squat. The fact of just being able to stand up under more weight will generally correlate with greater general leg strength for just about everybody. Squatting at higher rep ranges also has a nasty conditioning effect as well as being really painful. It's really damn productive at making human beings who are more tolerant to hard shit, which I see as being one of the more useful applications of gym time. Now this means improving your squat just for the sake of improving your squat, which is the main mission primarily of powerlifters. Even strongmen and Olympic lifters who do some form of squatting in competition also use their squat to increase other events, and their default technique is going to be influenced by those other goals. Powerlifters just simply need more weight on the bar, and they will tweak their training and their technique any way possible to meet that end, even at the cost of other traits. Technique adjustments to allow more weight to be used within the confines of the rules can easily happen at the expense of the other things that squatting is usually so effective at building, like capacity, athletic transfer, and muscular size. For a competitor, being able to stand up one time with 5 more pounds takes precedent over building generally strong legs. And powerlifters especially aren't concerned with anything that isn't a 1 rep max. So those are generally the 3 reasons that you would prioritize squatting in your training, but to figure out where you are on that spectrum, you have to understand what I call the tree of specialization. I wish it was as easy as pick one goal, then pick a cookie cutter program and go nuts. How you approach each one of these goals will change based on how you want to mix and match the traits. I want to powerlift while having 30-inch thighs is really different than just saying I want to powerlift. And it will also depend heavily on how advanced you are in your training. So to explain how these goals are related to each other and how they all relate to you, I present to you the tree of specialization. In the very beginning of training, squatting is squatting. Untrained lifters will add size, power, and general ability no matter what approach they take. If you have 2 high school athletes that went from 95 pounds to 275 in the squat, there's not going to be a meaningful difference in their ability to play or their muscular size if one used an Olympic style and the other squatted low bar. To a novice, building size is basically the same as building strength, and that's basically the same as building athleticism. And any form of squatting is going to do all of the above in a pretty dramatic fashion. The main concern with a novice plan isn't how effective it's going to be at growing the novice lifter, because everything tends to work with them. It's really going to be whether or not the things they do as a novice is going to teach them the things they need to know in order to excel as an intermediate. Intermediates will have more specific goals that require more specific skill, and they will have much more trouble seeing continued improvement with a very generalized, unstructured approach. They also won't recover as well, so they need to have a weekly split that takes that into account and a method of progression that is actually sustainable. So this is really where the two categories differ, since novices really can go nuts in training and be pretty much okay. By the time lifters are advanced and chasing elite status, they will get little to no transfer from other activities and won't be able to justify time spent away from skill practice specific to their sport. Being the best of the best requires complete divergence from anything that isn't going to directly help your skill. Here's an example. A lifter focused on hypertrophy might skip squats in favor of leg presses, lunges, and leg extensions. After a few months, their legs may have grown. But what judgments can we make, good or bad, based on the lifter's experience levels and their specific goals? What if it's a novice lifter who's primarily concerned with general size and strength? What if it's an intermediate lifter who wants to do a powerlifting meet later in the year? What if it's an advanced powerlifter chasing a world record? By now, you should see the general trend that less experienced lifters with less specific goals have a lot more wiggle room to get a good result. The novice who doesn't have squat-specific goals might be perfectly justified in finding other avenues for lifting that suit them better, while it becomes more absurd that the more advanced lifters with very squat-centric goals would spend a few months not squatting at all. We can guess that the intermediate lifter might be okay given the leg growth they experienced if they can successfully transition to a more specific phase of training for their peak that year. But the advanced lifter, well, a few months of no squatting basically means they can kiss that world record goodbye. And how does the training of the world's best powerlifters correlate to general activities? Long story short, going from a 400-pound to a 600-pound squat might make you a much better football player, but going from an 800-pound to a 900-pound squat likely won't. In fact, the things you have to do to get that 900-pound squat, including not wasting energy on other demanding activities, might actually make you worse at those activities. Now, these are very extreme cases, but it highlights the difference between trying to be the best squatter you can be and being an adequate bodybuilder, athlete, or just generally well-rounded lifter. One of the biggest points with straightening out your goal selection is that you do not need to walk a tightrope in your training, at least not those of you who aren't a cricket fart away from becoming elite in your sport. And you do not need to pick one goal and swear a blood oath to it. You just need to be aware of what you want to get out of your training and have the vaguest sense of what kinds of training decisions will get you closer or push you farther away. There are broadly two ways that people F their goal selection up. 1, no set goals, or no understanding of how to prioritize the goals that did get set. This usually results in just a lot of random bullshit. 2, a hyperfixation on one particular goal way before it's appropriate at your training level to do so. This over-specialization comes at the expense of other shit that budding lifters really need to focus on if they want to be good down the road. Random bullshit. Young lifter with ADD. I want to squat 2 times body weight. I want legs like Tom Platz. I want a no-hand pause squat. I want to Olympic lift. I want to do CrossFit. I want to do Bulgarian. I want to do German volumizing training. I want to do Smolov. No, wait. I think I really need to focus on my deadlift. There has to be a point where your workouts are influenced by something other than whatever the fuck your friend said today or the last thing you stumbled across on the Google search. Trying to do everything ensures that you will complete nothing. Now, for the rote novices, random bullshit actually isn't terrible for development. Early sports development with youth athletics actually revolves around highly varied modes of exercise so that athletes develop a wide base of skills that can then be refined early on. And remember, everything works for true novices, so new lifters can get stronger while they essentially play, bouncing around as they get a handle on pacing workouts, different exercises, and what their own physical limitations are. Now, that's all well and good, but there's a drawback to having novices just do what the fuck ever. Now, part of it is the super fucking annoying consequence of giving 6-month veterans of the gym the unearned belief that training actually isn't hard and they figured it out. This guy was really adamant that diminished returns wasn't a thing. More importantly to the young lifter is that it fails to teach the habits they will need to lean on when they do actually get something that looks like strength. After a couple of years of dedicated training, plateaus in strength will become a reality, and standing out in a competitive field will require greater competency in a narrower list of skills. That requires a specific plan that is a bit more complex than the random bullshit that worked for you in year one. And if you are doing a hard transition, quitting the random bullshit cold turkey because 2 of your last 3 years lifting were spent in plateau land, that means you're starting out at the bottom of the learning curve and you have to work your way back up. That's not really great when you could have spent those novice years practicing habits that would have served you later on. You have to get right with what it is that you really want to get out of your lifting. Do you squat to help with sports? Do you squat because you have a casual interest in aesthetics? Do you squat because you want to be a powerlifting world champion? Or is it just because Mark Ripito told you that it makes you harder to kill?
They're harder to kill.
Now, all are good reasons. Just write out a couple of sentences as to what you want to see in your development 6 months from now. There's pure hypertrophy goals like your favorite bodybuilder. There's pure general strength development like any athlete or strongman that you can think of. There's pure powerlifting goals like a Vlad, a Belkin, or a Big Ray. Or there's a mix of the three. The destination matters not. I'm just here to squat. Now consider your level of advancement from novice to elite, and don't blow smoke up your ass. It's entirely possible to have been at it for a few years and still be in novice territory. Once you have a handle on those two things, your experience level and your general goals, Google search methods of training using those keywords. Commit to one. Now here's a few notes that might make it a little easier to narrow down. 1. Powerlifting specific programs should be reserved for those who have dedicated powerlifting goals. Following percentages in a true periodized fashion is complex, dry as hell, and unlikely to keep your attention unless you are just really driven by the thought of putting on a onesie,
Lifting 5 more pounds.
and lifting in a high school gymnasium. 2. Hypertrophy and general strength programs should feature more supplementary exercises than pure powerlifting programs. Squatting is still the staple movement, but if you don't follow that up with some exercise variations, you will be limiting your potential growth. 3. Some of your training should have hard work with higher reps, especially beginner powerlifters. 4. Regardless of what you pick, do not cut and run until you've done it long enough to improve. Whatever you go into afterwards, you should absolutely have definite notes from what you just went through that will help you make better decisions going forward. Don't just cut into something randomly different. So think of the random bullshit lifter as the guy with 4 home improvement projects going on, none of which address the sinkhole forming in his front yard. On the other side of that coin is the overspecializer, the neurotic neighbor with aggressive OCD who's trimming the grass with scissors, but also hasn't picked up the cat shit inside their house in 6 years. Does the sheen of proud, responsible homeowner that the perfectly even grass gives off really mean anything if the rest of their house is an absolute fucking disaster? This is essentially what hyperspecialization does with inexperienced lifters. It gives them a reason to focus on the minutia over here while everything else falls apart over there. I wrote Base Strength in the follow-up books to address these problems. I wanted to more clearly express how variety works into training based on lifter experience and their specific goals. So just as the waves and progression schemes I outlined corralled the attention of the unfocused lifter and turned their efforts into a way of training that puts first things first, like fix the fucking sinkhole and then go clean the rain gutters, the discussion around base phases, on the other hand, includes higher reps, exercise variation, and a generally less specific approach, and that was there to convince the hyper-specialized lifter that they in fact do need to do something besides squatting for triples, doubles, and singles. Many, whether they want to admit it or not, are very driven by image. Just know, over-specialized lifter, that the rest of the gym goers see you in your singlet and your Federation-approved sleeves, weighing every plate before you put it on the bar. They all acknowledge your status as an esteemed member in the Brotherhood of Amateur Powerlifters, but for fuck's sake, at some point some actual hard work needs to be done, and it's not going to be done by practicing your walkout for the 19th fucking time. Stop tweezing the lawn and go clean up the cat shit. Periodization is so useful because it gives order and direction to training, which is an antidote to the otherwise mashed potato clusterfuck that occurs when impulsive gym goers are putting it together on the fly based on the last TikTok that they watched. Now, things really go south when those who don't need the degree of specificity that periodized powerlifting programs afford, those who are newer and need more generalized training, when those people seek out programs because of their apparent role as being the authentic approaches to powerlifting. The fuckery then gets turned up to 11 when these new lifters apply their own limited interpretation as to what makes this style of training work, basically applying their unrefined sense of what authentic powerlifting training really is and doing that. You can see how these training decisions very quickly become multidimensional nonsense. The simple fact is that anyone who is not currently an elite powerlifter does need a diverse skill set to lean on if they are going to have any hope of eventually becoming an elite powerlifter. That means the muscles of the thighs and hips have to become bigger. The tolerance to workload has to increase, and potentially laggy supportive areas have to be brought up. The best way to do that for novices and most intermediates: 1. Regularly feature some variation of the squat. 2. Regularly include some higher rep work, either in a dedicated day or in an AMRAP after your heavier sets. 3. Actually branch out to other accessory exercises that might expedite the process. For legs, sure, but also for the abs, the erectors, the upper body. In short, some iteration of bodybuilding should follow up your more specific squat work, especially in your biggest developmental years. If it sucks, you hate it, and it doesn't look anything like the last powerlifting compilation that you watched, it's probably exactly what you need, and you should do more of it and do it harder. Now that we have some understanding of goals and how it relates to your training decisions, we can talk about the second thing that absolutely fucks up your squat training: technique. With technique, we have to understand two different things: understanding leverages and managing your level of finickiness around your technique. Technique is seen to beginners as the holy grail of strength performance. We know that there's something about putting in hard work, something about progressive overload, something about eating your veggies and taking your vitamins. But when we think of the biggest lifters in history, the one thing that we ask ourselves is, how do we get some of that sweet, sweet technique? This word, technique, can mean a few things. It can be the general style you train with, or it can be the deliberate changes you make to the way you move to give you a specifically desirable result. Very specific powerlifting technique aims to move more weight at all costs, not only by permitting performance with less strain on the body, but actually by favoring it. If you can cut your range of motion in half, reduce the stroke of the movement to a straight line, and completely remove any reliance on weaker or smaller areas, you're in the money. But you can see how that might affect your setup if you're trying to use the squat to build other qualities, like size or general strength or athleticism for another sport. I've repeatedly told the story of my fixation on optimizing my bench technique when I was younger and how it resulted in new PRs in the bench, sure, but also in an active decline in size and actual useful strength. As Dan Green said in his West of West Side article, I wasn't going to technique my way to a 600-pound bench. Having a tight, efficient setup on the platform is very important for performance day, but without the foundational development work to grow you, you will hit a wall. So you have to keep this stuff in mind. Developmental techniques exist almost exclusively to target different muscles or movement patterns. So it's almost nothing to do with the weight and everything to do with where the stress is on the body. An Olympic style squat mimics the way an Olympic lifter catches the squat in the bottom of a clean or a snatch. And that involves getting comfortable squatting in a very disadvantaged ass to grass upright position and moving through a very long range of motion. So it's no surprise that this style of squatting not only builds big thighs, but it's a much better indicator of general athleticism and usefulness than a multiply sumo squat. Now, bodybuilding and hypertrophy approaches take that even further by saying, fuck the movement pattern, we want as much stress on the muscle as possible. Every possible advantage is taken away. Moment arms are made as long as possible by getting on the toes and pushing the knees forward as far as possible. Range is increased by taking the feet narrow and sitting down all the way. Waste products are forced to pool in the muscle belly through pulsed half reps, where a locked out rep would allow them to otherwise be shuttled away and permit more work. Bodybuilders are so fixated on size at the expense of everything else that the weight being moved hardly matters at all. Think of your squat technique like your approach to drag racing. An athlete is going to spend their time in first gear, making sure that each practice run is as fast and efficient as possible. But to a bodybuilder, a session is going to be like starting the race in fifth gear. It's extremely inefficient and it guarantees less power output per unit of energy expended. But that's the entire point. In this scenario, overheating the engine results in the building of a bigger engine. So the driver sacrifices actual demonstration of speed and power for building as much heat, stress, and friction within the engine as possible. So how you pick your approach is going to be determined based on whether you're trying to demonstrate strength and power and condition those qualities, or if you're trying to just stress the system as much as possible. And how you do either of those is going to depend on your leveraging. So as far as your leverages are concerned, if you haven't taken inventory of the peculiar circumstances that your skeleton has created for you, you may find yourself with a bullet hole in the foot from your own gun. Without external direction, lifters are left to mimic things that they've seen on the internet. Setups, cues, rituals, idiosyncrasies of their favorite lifters. The habits that the average IG viewer picks up, like so much lint on a roller, will either be completely useless, like the long, obnoxious deadlift setup rituals, or worse, actually be detrimental to their build, like if you're trying to copy a lifter who's built very differently than you. The most important thing to consider with your build is leverage, so here's a crash course. Consider a stick, a rock, and a boulder. The stick is the lever arm, which is your leg in this scenario. The rock is the fulcrum, or the joint, which the lever arm moves around. The moment arm is the horizontal distance between the joint and the weight. This horizontal distance is the indicator of how hard you're going to have to work to move the same load. A long moment arm, which means the joint is very far away from the load, means you're going to have to hit the fucking gas to move a pretty small weight. Whereas a short moment arm, i.e. the joint is very close to the load, allows you to get much more purchase and move much more weight for the exact same amount of effort. This is why squat techniques that get the knees over the toes have such a big impact on quad growth. The moment arm between the weight and the knees is a lot greater, so the muscles that extend the knee, the quads, have to work a lot harder. More stress per rep means more growth overall. This is why the knees over toes guy took on his name, because this same type of stress, if progressed into slowly, can strengthen knee joints that otherwise deteriorate in Western society. Knowledge of leverage is used to shorten moment arms, which allows you to move more weight for the same effort and the same amount of strength. And this is key for maximizing powerlifting performance. This is taking a low bar position, which puts the weight closer to the hips, and taking a wider stance, which shortens the moment arm at the knee and distributes that stress to the bigger, stronger muscles of the hip. Aside from technique, we can also evaluate how they are affected by a lifter's actual limb proportions. Paul Carter recently talked about how Tom Platz was born to be a hypertrophy squatter.
Tom Platz was built to squat. When he get to the bottom of the squat, he had a completely vertical torso. He had very short femurs. The squat itself would have always been a pretty good quad exercise for Tom.
The way he was built, as upright as he could stay, as far forward as his knees could go, all of these things determined ultimately whether or not squats would work for him, and it just so happened that for him, they absolutely did. Now, many other people who are more leggy would not and could not get the same type of effect using squats as their primary driver of hypertrophy. They had to include other exercises to get a similar result.
And I have a friend named Gary. He had no legs, and he thought he was cursed. And I used to tell Gary, I could literally look at him, tell him, bro, you are not built for squatting. He was in a powerlifting gym, and they're like, you just got to get your squat really big, bro, and your legs will grow. Finally, he listened to me. He actually went and started using the hack instead and using bodybuilding-based movements. He got great legs now.
Yeah.
So it was literally just the case of structurally, he just could not load his quads with a squat.
I fall into that short-limbed camp. We often get referred to as T-Rexes, but I don't think that goes far enough. I think dachshund build is a lot more appropriate, and those of us that do have the torso to limb ratio of a miniature wiener have a lot more wiggle room when it comes to finding a comfortable and efficient squat setup. Now, you would think that the long legs would create a longer moment arm and thus a bigger stress, causing more growth, but leggy lifters have to bend forward more to maintain balance in a squat. This switches the lion's share of the tension into the hips and the posterior chain, which is great for developing a great ass and a monster deadlift, but it's pretty crappy for stacking slabs of beef onto your legs. Now, some people can squat and only squat to get their quads to grow. As a dachshund-like human myself, I am absolutely one of those people. You're going to find with quad growth that the important thing is what your knees are doing. I have short, stocky legs, and that allows me to easily stay very upright and to shove my knees way forward. The upright torso and the forward knee position disadvantages the quads. It demands more from them, which means every rep provides a greater stimulus for growth. It also means that my strongest squat setup actually isn't the one that is the most mechanically advantaged. Wide feet, hips back, forward lean. It's the one that makes the best use of my most developed musculature. Do you see the circular reasoning here? You pick a movement to grow you by putting you into a mechanical disadvantage, which is definitionally opposed to your most advantageous setup, which is what you should use if you wanted to use the most weight. But all of the growth in those muscles, along with the thousands of hours of skill practice you got in that disadvantaged setup, made you strongest in a mechanically weaker position. I can't stress this enough. You get good at how you train. So those with very average proportions, which most of you are going to have, should bias towards a developmentally effective setup. And those with obviously skewed proportions, like having very, very long legs, should bias towards where they feel most comfortable and where they can get the most amount of work in. Now, this isn't just about knowing the ratio of your inseam to your torso. As useful as it is to know your limb proportions, you also have to know what your ankles and hips will allow you to do. You have to know if you have an arch collapse. You have to be aware of your positioning and pinpoint what might be causing you to not get as much out of these movements as you potentially could be. I've been around long enough to see guys that could deadlift a fucking house not be able to squat more than 315 because their arch collapse was so severe that their ankles would cave in, like an anime schoolgirl who has to pee. I've seen lifters stubbornly grind bone against bone because they insisted on doing the groin-tearing, ultra-wide west side sumo squat despite having hip sockets that pointed straight ahead. Now, just like limb proportion, most people are going to have a normal-ish build, and there's going to be a few options they have where they can effectively get into a good squat position depending on their goals. But those who have the most trouble squatting tend to have some peculiar issue with their build, be it awkwardly long legs, hip sockets that point a certain way, either forward or out to the side, or unforgivingly tight ankles or hips. You can't solve these problems if you can't diagnose them, and you need to know what your build will allow for, and more importantly, what it absolutely will not. So a big point to unfucking your squat technique is to not insist on doing a squat setup that you simply aren't built for or haven't taken the steps to acclimate to. Now, understanding all of this stuff is very important, but really you need to understand if changing your technique is vitally important or if it really is just painfully irrelevant and a distraction to most of your training. There's two extremes here. Number one is those who waste training hours absolutely obsessing over their technique as if they're Beatrix Kiddo trying to execute the 5-point palm exploding heart technique. We've already established that your best squat technique, as far as moving weight is concerned, is going to be determined by what your body mechanics will allow and what your training history has made your preference. Perfect in that way is very individual. It can change as you change, and it requires years to refine. Your goal as a novice or intermediate isn't to have the tightest, most legit, most look ma,
I'm a power lifter
technique. Your goal is to get your squat passable so that you can get stronger without fucking yourself up, so that you move better as time goes on instead of worse. A passable squat allows the quality of the program and your adherence to it to determine whether your strength increases. This is where your focus should be, and any tweaks to your technique should be few and far between. Good technical adjustments should be obvious right out of the gate. They should allow for more tension, more control, more efficiency, and power. Shitty adjustments are ones that force you to take 10 steps back and completely relearn entire movement patterns in the hopes that mastering this arbitrary way of setting up will somehow benefit you more than actually doing some fucking work in the way that you currently squat. Now, the benefit of movement variations and having accessories in your program is that it allows you to experiment with these other positions without completely ditching your squat. If you only ever back squat, it will be a mystery to you what the weight feels like in different positions. But anyone who regularly includes alternate stances in different bar positions will know with certainty where their strongest and most efficient position is. To all of you finicky nerds who count millimeters of hip shift and that have tried 9 stances since I started this video, this is the moral of the story. Once your squat is passable, stop interrupting your workouts to fuck with your stance and let the damn program do its thing. Now, the second extreme is those who have holes in their technique that you can drive the Titanic through, who look like baby deer with cerebral palsy, who are as deliberate and steadfast in their setup as a bowl of tapioca, and who think it will all be fine. I know that dropping a line in the sand between standards being too high and standards being too low is really tricky. It's the main reason no one wants to share their Tinder swipe history with their friends. Let's start with what passable actually means and see if you're meeting the minimum requirement for going on with the workout. 1. The bar. Is it firmly secured to your shoulders without rolling around, taking your head off at the neck, or putting a bunch of stress on your wrists, elbows, and shoulders? If it is, good for you. Number 2, posture. Can you get through each rep without your spine folding like a wet piece of cardboard? If so, great, carry on. Number 3, can you get to at least a passable powerlifting depth with the hips below the knees? If so, great. Number 4, can you keep your knees stacked over or slightly outside your feet, heels on the ground, weight spread evenly or slightly towards the outside of the foot? If you answered yes to these, fantastic, you have a passable squat. If you answered no to any one, it is your job to figure out what the remedies are and how to best implement them without sidelining your training completely. Figuring out your squat technique is like running into trouble down a whitewater rapid. You're going forward whether you like it or not, and pausing isn't an option, so you better figure it out on the fly. Now, some of these fixes will require starting way back at square one, unfortunately. For instance, if you can't reach depth with an empty barbell, you have no business piling on 3 plates for some shitty partial knock-kneed squats just so you can say you got it in. That equates to 315 pounds of bullshit. Most issues, however, can be figured out as you go by including mobility and skill practice as part of your warm-ups, in between working sets, or in specialty exercises later in the workout. If your ankles or groin are too tight to squat correctly, then they need to be stretched daily. If you struggle to brace, then ab and upper back exercises need to take priority. Load management is usually the first order of business in these situations, since most form breakdowns don't occur until the weight gets challenging. Those who look like a stripper picking up a dollar bill or Forrest Gump trying to dance in his special braces can usually pull off a passable squat when the RP is low and the weight is more manageable. So keep it fucking manageable. The best course of action in these scenarios is to set a technical cap where you stop adding weight before form breaks down. You want to be able to identify those ranges where the weight is still somewhat challenging, but it's not causing you to get into those horrible positions and practice bad habits, and get as much volume as possible under that threshold. It's not sexy, but damn it, it works.